Today we're going to finish up meaning and aging, but let me get Drizzy to help kick it off for me.
She say, do you love me? I tell her only partly. I only love my bed and my mom. I'm sorry. 50 dub, I even got it tatted on me. 81, they'll bring the crashers to the party. And you know me.
Today we're going to talk about the meaningful behaviors throughout the lifespan that really promote positive and or negative aging. And you will see throughout the life course how these meaningful behaviors and relationships and activities really have downstream consequences to the aging process. We are taking this life course perspective, right? Everything that happens to us in old age is really a product of things that happened to us earlier in adulthood, in emerging adulthood, in adolescence, and in earlier life. So these are the connections that we have to make, especially when we think about what are the behaviors, what are the relationships that help predict and drive aging well or aging not well. When we talk about the life course perspective, we really have to accredit Erik Erikson, who was one of the first theorists to really connect early, middle, and late life. And he came up with this theory of psychosocial development that really still holds up today. This theory, right, gets into what is the meaning of life. You know, what is it we see ourselves at the end really focusing on? You know, what are we working towards? And according to this theory of psychosocial development, right, it's this to develop this ego integrity. Ego integrity. Like our lives as a whole, right? We see that our life has meaning because we see the cohesion in it. We see that there's a path that we took, and that path made us who we are, and we are content with it. That is that development of ego integrity. When we talk about ego despair, though, that's when we start to see that, oh, there is no integrity to our lives. You know, everything didn't happen for a reason. Our life might not be worth it. So this is that ego despair, right? This despair really highlights that you're not content with your life. You know, you're full of life regrets. And this is potentially why we all know how we have these grumpy neighbors or these grumpy older adults, right? That's not just because they're grumpy because what's happening to them now, right? It's something along the life course that they may be grumpy about. You know, even though it's important to say that maybe their current situation, they're not entirely happy. It corresponds to what we do earlier in Boom the Life, right? This ego integrity development, and specifically generativity, right, leads to this ego integrity development. Very sloppy. I would get an F in penmanship. So let's just give it an example from my research. So we have found that mentoring is when you actively help somebody in their personal or professional development, right? And this is inherently generative, right? This is like giving back to the next generation, you know, leaving your mark. And you could see my publications on this, that those who have mentored are more likely to develop this ego integrity through this indirect pathway, because they are building up their generativity, right? Their generative capacities and fulfilling those needs, you know, the need to leave a legacy, the need to give back. Oh look, I'm in this little circle, this generative ego integrity circle. Right before adulthood, people have to deal with these generative needs, right? If you become generative and satisfy those needs, you feel like you leave your mark on the next generation. You feel like you have left a good life legacy. But when you don't, right? When you don't feel that, when you don't do that, you feel like you are stagnant. Being stagnant is really associated with what we could midlife crisis. So that's when you don't feel like you have made a contribution to the world. So that's when you don't feel like you have really given back or have left an appropriate life legacy. And one of the main reasons why I really love this theory is that, one, it is one of the hallmark theories that ties the whole life course together, but also it still has a lot of relevance these days. You start to see people who have done it all and seen it all, and they made a ton of money. They give back, right? You start to see that they start to have an itch. People like Andrew Carnegie or Rockefeller, right? John Rockefeller, who had a ton of money, right, through railroads and through oil. They start to develop these foundations, to support these generative needs. And these generative needs are inherently a human thing, a human psychological need. And we know that sometimes, though, the environment doesn't allow for somebody to really meet these needs. So this is when you get this other part of the conflict. And again, my work really highlights some of these life themes, that people provide themselves in later life. How do you form your life? What is the story that you tell yourself, you tell your kids? And these are all associated with these generative needs. And one way we do it is through reminiscence and reminiscence therapy. The way you tell your story, just like in MTV or 90 Day Fiancé, they cut up the story and make it something maybe that it is or isn't, the same way that people do, because memory is not all just 100%, it's how we edit it. Think about editing something in, the Jersey Shore to make Snooki seem like a certain way, like a super party animal. These things get edited. I always go back to the Jersey Shore, but you could see how these 90 Day Fiancé, MTV, how these shows, it's all about editing, and you edit here. You edit here and look back at it and see how do you put things together, and that tells your story. And we know how people tell their story really affects their mental health and well-being. That's why but this is modifiable, meaning we could help somebody edit their story to be more adaptive. Obviously, if you tell your story in a way of I'm just gonna be a loser, I failed at this and I failed at that, obviously you're gonna experience depressive symptoms, right? You're going to experience negative outlooks towards yourself, right? You're gonna have a negative self-concept compared to if you edit it in a more adaptive and more positive way. One of the great shows, as Past My Time, yeah, it was Past My Time is earlier than when I was born, was This Is Your Life. And really kind of puts in perspective how much people actually do in their lives. And this show mostly with famous people. Is it famous people? I don't know. I gotta look back. But it kind of gives you this life review process. There's a little clip on that.
Well, what I can say is the three-time champion of the world, tonight, Muhammad Ali, this is your life. Come on down the stage, just go under the man. We've got some lovely surprises for you, very promising. Really enjoy it. Right here. That's your seat. Well, I must say a very special thank you to your pal and mine, boxing commentator Reg Guttridge, for bringing you along here.
He lied to me. I want to say one thing. I watched this show for years in the States, and I wondered why was everybody so anxious to get me here, and this is terrible.
This is the right time to get you. Muhammad Ali, this is your life, and there could be no more appropriate time for me to say that as we reach the end of a year which has seen you fight your way into history by becoming the first man to win the World Heavyweight Championship 3 times over. Now, you have fought in a total of 59 professional matches the world over, but for our next surprise, Muhammad, I want to remind you of a match which showed you a very uncharacteristic side.
Well, I didn't know at the time, but later you told me you were scared of me.
Of course, your wife, Veronica. Sit down there, Veronica. Veronica, how did you find out he was scared of you?
Well, we met when he was in Salt Lake City doing an exhibition. And when I met him, he didn't say anything. And usually he grabs and hugs people like he still does now. But later when I got to know him, he told me that that's why he wouldn't say anything, because he was afraid.
Well, it's not easy to contemplate a speechless Muhammad Ali, because the fact that you're...
Beautiful women just frighten most men.
Crazy, right? Just to see your whole life like that, you know, all the people that were so important to you and bringing them into one entity, one place, and in one time. You know, I guess that's why I love that show. You know, you watch these of, this is your life. These are the people that are important to you. And you could have happened in the near future of doing these living funerals for people. And essentially what this is you don't want all these kind things said about you when you are dead. You want to hear them somewhat. So here's like your chance for people to actually tell you, you know, but while you are still alive. And life therapy also. Here's a little clip of how there is There are therapies, life therapies that help people become better editors of their lives.
Life story work is essentially reminiscing. What you're doing is recovering a person by concentrating on their past. It brings back to life again their history. In essence, their history is no longer consigned to the past. We actually talk about it in the present. It doesn't necessarily make a person better, but it most definitely will improve their mood. They'll feel better as a consequence of focusing on what was important to them. And what is critically important as well, it means that we know that we have something to do when we're with that older person. We can sit and talk and engage with that person, share happy moments. It's not all about caring for somebody in a physical way. Life story work can be carried out in a number of ways, and that's one of the beauties of that activity. It's never boring. You can carry it out as a group or one-to-one. Group life story work tends to be more impersonal. You talk to people about what life was like in the 1930s or 40s or 1950s. One-to-one work, well, that's more personal, it's more intimate. It gives the person the opportunity to talk not only about the good times, but the less good times. And so that's a more intimate life story activity. Now that might result in the creation of a life story book. A life story book is about people's life and memories. It contains photographs, pictures, letters, and a narrative. It tells the story of who a person is. It's the tangible product of life story activity, which means to say it's an activity as you create the book, but it's also something very pleasant that you can take away as a tangible outcome of engaging in life story activity. Something else that can come out of a one-to-one life story session is the creation of a memory box. And that is what it says, it's a box of things, because not everything that's important to a person from their past can go into a book. So it's a box full of trinkets, memorabilia, knickknacks from the past, as well as photographs and letters. It's a box that you can look in, rummage in, take items out, talk about, and that person's life then comes into the present rich because you're actually showing them something that is tangible from their past. So it's an alternative to creating a life story book.
With dementia, the past memory is ever so fresh in their mind, like it only happened yesterday. So if we can tune in on that, then we get a great activity going on. Everyone starts to chat, everyone starts to socialise. So that is why I feel it's very important to have these reminiscence sessions.
Life story work is rewarding for both the person who is caring and the person who's being cared for. For the person who's being cared for, it lifts their mood because they're talking about happier times. For the person who's caring, if that's a professional carer, then they're finding something unique about a person that previously they didn't know. But for a family carer, it's all about shared memories. Again, we have quality time.
Well, that's so amazing. And one of the most powerful things I have ever seen, right? Because I do a lot of these life review and life story therapies, is when a granddaughter saw a picture, New York came out, saw a picture of her grandma, and she was all dolled up and all pretty, and like, you could see the wheels turning, on the granddaughter, being like, wow, grandma, you used to be hot, you used to be super hot. So it got her out of the mentality that, oh, her grandma is just this old, decrepit person that has a lot of disabilities. So that's one of the powerful intergenerational effects of these life stories. For those in class, I want you to put in the discussion for this lecture quiz, what is the power of being your life story, telling your life story? There's no right or wrong answer, just add to that discussion. We know that development, though, doesn't just happen without context, right? Devoid of context. We don't just develop in a vacuum. That'd be pretty hard, Imagine being in a Hoover and then growing. Okay, I digress. So here is Yuri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model, in which it's a really conceptual framework that just shows that we do not develop devoid of context. And you see here that there are these different layers, right? So the first is, this is you, that is you, but then your immediate environment, your parents, your family, that is this micro system that affects you, this micro system. Then you have this mesosystem, which gets a little bit even further. What is the neighborhood you live in? What are the schools in that neighborhood? And then it goes to this exosystem, right? These are what are those structures in those neighborhoods that promotes or deter the aging or development process. And then lastly, we have this macro system, right? This is what the core just beliefs of the society that really affects how people age and develop. For example, let's say this culture, right, America, is more individualistic. So that really wraps up how people develop, thinking this individual mentality compared to a collectivist culture. And then we have the chrono system, meaning that this changes over time. How people operate in the 50s is way different than how they operate now in the 2020s. So for those in class, one of those questions, right, I'm going to ask you in the quiz is to fill in this Yuri Bronfenbrenner model, because it's on the syllabus. I want you to consider development in context. It's not devoid of context. There's all these different influences on you, especially on what has a felt significance, right? What has meaning to you. So I'm going to ask you a question about that. So as you see, the context really matters to your influencing your development, right? And influencing your development really has that impact on how you age. And that is all part of this life course perspective. And here, another model, right, of aging and just showing that the context really matters is this intersectionality, right? We don't just consider age, right? It's not just about your age, right? It's about your race, it's about your culture, the language, your gender. Oh, over there. There's all these things matter, you know, to whether you age well. And really, we'll define that throughout the semester. But here is a big part, right? This education piece. This education really has a big bearing on a lot of these health outcomes in later life. For instance, we start to see that education is really protective of many factors beyond your physical health. It's also protective and promotes mental health, and we're starting to really see a lot of strong evidence that it promotes cognitive health as well. And all this that we're seeing is part of this cognitive reserve, which we will get into in a few weeks. A lot of this development of cognitive reserve we're starting to see as being this protection for a lot of these negative outcomes in later life. When I say protection, meaning help you function long, you know, protection of your quality of life. And like we highlighted in class, people provided so much meaning in our lives, right? These are the felt significant aspects that are pretty much universal through cultures, through the lifespan. And this connection, right? Connection with the community at this larger level is really key. You know, when you're part of a community, you are part of something bigger than yourself. And older adults, they have a higher likelihood, right? They have a higher rate or ratio of engaging in these meaningful activities in the community through volunteering and the bigger picture, bigger umbrella of civic engagement, right? Being involved in something bigger, like the political system. We see that older adults also have a higher percentage of voting compared to younger ages. And this is why we see during the campaigns that a lot of pandering is going to focus on Social Security and Medicare, because these are the policies that really impact older adults, and obviously they care about that. So you're going to see a lot of pandering to that on these political campaigns. And being civically engaged, right, being more involved in the community and larger society really is related to well-being, you know, so how somebody feels about themselves. And because, like I said, older adults have this higher participation rate, it goes beyond the self. And this really highlights going back to Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, right? Being part of this, leaving this life legacy, part of these generative concerns, right? Generative needs, right? These satisfying these generative needs. And this goes beyond hedonic needs, right? Meaning it's beyond yourself. It's contributing to a larger society. And we know those eventually funnel down to the development of ego integrity. So this also shows and highlights that you don't just have to develop generative needs in adulthood. These are epigenetic, right? These happen throughout the life course, right? You could even develop in older ages, and that will affect your ego integrity as well. Let's go. Okay, so
oh, that's awkward.
Just like people have a big bearing on meaning, so does work. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics, we spend most of our working day doing work or work-related activity. And if you think about over the decades that comes about and that happens, and if we think about how many decades that happened, right? How many decades that we work in life, those add up. And work becomes a significant part of who you are. You know, in later ages, you start to see people saying like, oh, I was a retired mechanic. I was a retired elevator fixer. I was a retired teacher. And that becomes part of your identity. So work has a big bearing on your meaning because that's the expertise you develop. You know, if you do 20 plus years of something, you're more likely to develop some type of expertise in some type of craft. And nowadays, because people are not only living longer, but living healthier than ever, work starts to be this medium in which they continue to contribute. You know, even if they are formally retired from their careers, they start to funnel that knowledge and their strengths to contributing to the world, right? These generative needs. And this is a little clip about these, what we call ENCORE careers.
Chances are you've been working for 20, 30, even more years, and you've hit a time where whether you have to keep on working or you want to keep on working, you know you want to do it on your terms, and you know you want it to matter, and you want to continue to make a living. How do you get all those ingredients to line up? That's what this book is about. An ENCORE career is for people who want to make a living and make a difference, usually after what they consider their primary career. This book has the voices of other people, but it is not just about other people who have done this. It's about how you are going to do this. The idea is to give you all the tools you need for your ENCORE transition, everything from how to do a salary negotiation and where the jobs are, and build your network.
It was more than making a change. For me, it was actually fulfilling a dream that I had.
I think you get to a point in your life where you have to feel like what you're doing matters. That's where I want to get now for these next 20 years.
I really consider this in life to be my main act. Everything else up to this was just kind of a warm-up.
And one of the most amazing parts of that is that we start to see that people, even though they weren't in that particular field, they start leveraging some of their knowledge that they have gained just through life, right? This wisdom to use their strengths towards causes, you know, to help people in different ways. And I helped start a lab at Claremont Graduate University understanding these careers, these ENCORE careers. Shout out to Dr. Gene Nakamura and Mike Chiksat-Mihai. So for those of you in class, what would your ENCORE career be? So put that in the discussion for the quiz. What would your ENCORE career be? So we know that people are significant to us. We know work is significant to us. So what about leisure, right? Kind of this pie, right? If we think about this pie, we think about work taking up a big part of our life, and then our time with people also. But then there's this leisure, right? Which also could encompass people, but this leisure is more about your free time. You know, what do you do for its own sake? You know, what do you do? And what do you do really has a big bearing on your meaning, right? That you derive from it, right? Can you do that anymore in older ages, or do you find another way to do an aspect of that, what you find meaningful? So this is all about these activities, these meaningful activities that you really enjoy. And a lot of people engage in sports, and sports is this thing that is very meaningful to them. You know, being able to beat their buddy in tennis or engage in these activities that they just do for their own sake, right? These are the fun things. However, we have to come into play that education, right, and general and bigger picture social economic status has a real big bearing on whether people could engage in these meaningful activities. So we saw this a lot during the 2008 economic crises. People who are close to retirement couldn't retire anymore because their 401ks hit the fan, right? Their poop hit the fan, right? I guess I should make this friendly. Shit hit the fan, right? Because the stock market tanked, their assets tanked, and they had to work longer, shrinking this pie, right, of their leisure activities. So even if you think about being able to pay for, especially in LA, we're about to dog on LA, yoga studios, we know yoga has a lot of these benefits, right, for your mental health, your physical health, but those cost a lot of money potentially. So engaging in that really is part of this whole link to social economic status. And bigger picture is like, if you have more money and more resources, you're able to engage in more leisure activities. So we should probably spell it like this: leisure. And when we talk about meaningfulness, right, it relates to your happiness levels. And remember, studying it scientifically, right? Happiness is subjective well-being, and those have 3 components to it, and we will get to that in this class. This cognitive component, when you think about it, how satisfied are you with life? And the affect component. And affect is these emotions that you have, and there are negative ones and positive ones. So if you are higher satisfied, have less negative affect, and more positive affect, you're considered to be happy, right? You're considered to have high happiness, subjective well-being, right? Subjective well-being. But that's how we would quantify this happiness, right? As these 2 components of cognitive and affective having these 2 components of emotion. So people who cite work and family, right, as being meaningful to their lives have higher happiness levels in general across cultures. And lastly, when we really discuss meaning in life, it's not just about the good things that happen to us. We've been really highlighting a lot of the good things, the family, the friends, the work. A lot of it has to do with reconciling the bad. And what really is an important factor in aging well, at least psychologically, is being able to make good out of the bad. One of the most influential psychologists is Viktor Frankl. He really highlighted the importance of meaning, right? Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor and really shed light into how important meaning was, just to not even just life, but in the developmental process and survival. And he came up with this logotherapy, right? The study of meaning, right? And how that really, understanding the crux of how people create meaning. People deal and derive meaning from these events that happen to them, right? Negative events really relate to their developmental trajectory, right? Their ability to function later down the line. And being able to make sense out of it all, right? Being able to make sense out of any situation, good or bad, is one of the keys to development. Like I highlighted before, right? We have to edit, right? Sometimes we have to be able to edit and pick out why this is so important, or why this bad thing happened to me, or why this good thing happened to me, is really part of that change that Viktor Frankl was really talking about. And Viktor Frankl's work really opened the lines to understanding how people become resilient and deal with trauma, because life is not all good. So a really good illustration is that think about your baseline, right? This is your baseline well-being. And when something happens, right, something bad happens, right, we would think that there's a trauma that happens and your well-being dips down, right? This is that event that happened. However, when we talk about resilience, right, it's being able to bounce back to your baseline. And when we say people, when they bounce back to their baseline, we call that resilience, right? People are resilient to be able to bounce back. But a lot of the times, right, especially if people go through post-traumatic stress disorder or other extreme traumas, they just maybe never recover to baseline, or even fall into these bouts of depressive syndromes or anxiety, and they never really recover. Because, you know, some things, especially Holocaust surviving or going through any war, is really traumatic, and maybe they are not able to develop this resilience, right? Just because it's just so overwhelming. However, there's this other study, right? However, you could go beyond that, right? There's some people who make trauma and bounce back even higher, which we would call post-traumatic growth. And this is when you go beyond your baseline. You experience this trauma, and you bounce back, but then you bounce back better than you were at baseline. You know, a good example of this would be the person who founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? Her son was killed by a drunk driver, and then she went through the whole grieving experience and had a bigger mission, you know, to start this organization, MAD, to try and prevent this from ever happening. So how we bounce back from these traumatic events or the negatives is really a big determinant of what we make meaning out of. You know, why did we experience something, for the good or for the bad? So being able to preserve, right, to some extent, the meaningful activities, the relationships, your interpretation of events is really part of this selection, optimization, and compensation that we highlighted about Paul Baltus's work, right? Being able to compensate for losses that occur with age and being able to adapt, right? That's the key. Being able to maintain these relationships that are meaningful, these activities that maybe you can't do anymore as you age. So being able to adapt to these dysfunctions, these declines, and people who have died, right? Death is part of this selection, optimization, compensation mechanism, right? SOC for short, right? Being able to preserve meaning. We went through so much to answer that question, what is the meaning of life? But psychologically, hopefully I presented that case where it's all about that ego integrity development. And we know that this has such a big impact, right? What meaningful activities, what is significant to people, what relationships are important to people. This really has a big bearing on people's development throughout the life course, and obviously that leads and bleeds to later life. And how people adapt is really a big function of preserving meaning in somebody's life. And the study of aging and meaning is so important because it just doesn't, boom, you are an older adult and you stop having meaning, or you still have meaning, right? It's about preserving this meaning or interpreting and editing this meaning. And studying meaning in life is a scientific process, which you guys did in your class by taking the MLQ, the Meaning in Life questionnaire, which really demystifies and helps standardize this study of such a big, large topic such as meaning. But we know operationally, this is this felt significance of people's lives. And this felt significance is part of this whole end goal. You know, when we review the theory of psychosocial development, this development of ego integrity. Does your life have this cohesion? Does it make sense, right? Do you see those connections, and do you accept? And we can really promote meaning and development through this life review, life stories process, because it really depends how you edit your life story, you know, how you edit seeing your life to make these connections. You know, these are intervenable, right? We can modify these factors of how people edit their life stories, how they edit telling their lives. Knowing that there is continuity, right? It all fits together in this puzzle piece together. And one of the big things about meaning is that everybody has their different meaning, right? Some might find meaning in church and community, while others find it in their leisure activities. But this is so idiosyncratic because everybody has a different felt significance for certain activities. You guys with your pets, you guys love your pets. I don't know why. But understanding it psychologically, from this psychological perspective of ego integrity, is going to be key to understanding how people develop this process and how this drives later development. And how this drives later development really is what this life course perspective is. So when somebody asks that question, what is the meaning of life? You can help them answer that from the psychological perspective and say it is this development of ego integrity. Wow, that was just so much information, but I just wanted to provide you this whole science and experience of how aging, right? Understanding the aging process, especially at the end of life and what provides us meaning, really puts that goalpost, you know, puts us, what are we working towards, you know, through this development that is life, right? And the life course. I hope you enjoyed this discussion about meaning and aging. And as always, I will see you next